The Sands Hotel Showroom, Las Vegas, September 14, 1972. 800 people filled the seats, drinks in hand, waiting for Dean Martin to take the stage. The orchestra was ready. The lights were set. The show was sold out. It should have been another perfect Saturday night, another standing ovation, another paycheck, another performance in a career built on never disappointing an audience. But at 9:15 p.m., 15 minutes before curtain, Dean Martin walked out the stage door, got in his car, and drove away. He didn't perform that night. Not for 800 paying customers. Not for the casino that depended on him. Not for the career that required him to always show up. He performed somewhere else, for an audience of one, a 12-year-old boy who was dying. And what happened in that hospital room in those 30 minutes reveals who Dean Martin really was when no one was watching. Before we understand what Dean sacrificed, you need to understand who he sacrificed it for. Tommy Chen was 45 years old, a Chinese immigrant who'd arrived in California in 1952 at age 25 with nothing but work ethic and determination. He'd been a master electrician and stagehand at the Sands Hotel since 1960. 12 years of perfect attendance, never late, never complaining, the kind of crew member every performer trusted. He specialized in lighting design, could solve technical problems nobody else could figure out, and had earned respect from everyone who worked with him. Over those 12 years, Tommy's professional relationship with Dean had evolved into something closer to friendship, the kind built on mutual respect rather than celebrity worship. Dean knew Tommy's work ethic, his pride, his dedication, and he knew about Tommy's son Michael. Michael Chen was 12 years old, born in 1960, diagnosed 18 months ago with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the aggressive form that didn't respond well to treatment. He'd endured 2 rounds of chemotherapy and 1 failed bone marrow transplant. The doctors had given their final prognosis 3 weeks ago, days to weeks maximum, maybe 5 to 10 days if they were being optimistic. Michael was extremely weak now, requiring oxygen support and morphine for pain management, barely able to sit up, his hair mostly gone from the chemotherapy. Before the illness, he'd been energetic, a straight-A student, a music lover who played trumpet in the school band. But what defined Michael more than anything was his obsession with Dean Martin. He knew every song, owned every record, had a poster of Dean in his hospital room, considered Dean his absolute hero. His current dream, the thing he talked about constantly, was seeing Dean perform live one final time, though he'd never been to a show, was too young before and too sick now. 3 weeks before that Saturday night, during Dean's afternoon rehearsal at the Sands, Tommy was adjusting stage lights on a tall ladder. It was 3:00 p.m., and Dean was on stage with the orchestra, running through Everybody Loves Somebody. Dean noticed Tommy moving slower than usual, making small mistakes, which was unprecedented for someone so reliable. After rehearsal, Dean approached Tommy backstage, genuinely concerned. "Tommy, you okay? You seem somewhere else today." Tommy hesitated, didn't want to burden anyone, especially Dean, but something in Dean's tone, genuine concern rather than polite small talk, broke through his reserve. "My son Michael. The doctors say he's not doing well." Dean knew about Michael, had met him once 4 years ago backstage. A bright 8-year-old kid who'd asked Dean about trumpet technique, and Dean had spent 20 minutes talking music with him, impressed by the kid's knowledge and passion. "What are they saying exactly?" Tommy's voice cracked, his grip tightening on the ladder to steady himself. "Weeks, maybe days. He's at Sunrise Hospital, 4th floor, room 412. They're keeping him comfortable." That's the word they use. Comfortable. He paused, wiping his eyes, embarrassed by the emotion. "He keeps asking if he can see you perform one more time." "Just once." "Before." Tommy couldn't finish the sentence, the reality too overwhelming. "I keep telling him when he gets stronger, when he can leave the hospital. But we both know that's not going to happen." Dean put a hand on Tommy's shoulder, said nothing for a long moment, just stood there with him in the silence of shared understanding. Finally, Tommy spoke again quietly, apologetically. "Sorry, you don't need to hear this. You've got a show tonight." "I shouldn't have." Dean interrupted gently. "Tommy, I'm glad you told me." That was all. No promises, no commitments, no grand gestures, just acknowledgement. Just seeing Tommy as human, not just crew. Tommy nodded, composed himself, went back to work. Dean didn't forget. Dean never forgot. Saturday, September 14th, 1972 arrived. Show night and the Sands showroom began its familiar preparation at 700 p.m. Waitstaff set 800 seats with precision, covering tables with fresh white linens, lighting candles that would flicker throughout the performance. Bartenders stocked premium liquor, Jack Daniels and Chivas and Tanqueray, the brand's high rollers expected. Sound engineers tested microphone levels, adjusting for feedback, making sure every seat would hear Dean's voice perfectly. The orchestra arrived, 17 musicians who'd played with Dean countless times, warming up with scattered notes, trumpet scales and piano arpeggios, and the soft brush of drums. The smell of cigarette smoke already hung heavy in the air before doors even opened, mixing with the anticipation that always preceded a Dean Martin show. In Dean's dressing room, his tuxedo hung on the door, freshly pressed and perfect. His bow tie lay on the counter beside carefully arranged stage makeup, foundation and powder, and eyeliner necessary under the hot lights. His manager, Mort Viner, sat reviewing the set list, noting timing and special requests from high rollers who'd paid extra for song dedications. Dean sat on the leather couch, unusually quiet, not nervous because Dean never got nervous, but distracted, distant, his mind somewhere else. He kept glancing his watch, 7:15, then 7:30, then 7:45, each minute ticking closer to showtime, but also ticking away from something else. He was thinking about room 4012 at Sunrise Hospital, thinking about Michael, thinking about Tommy standing in the wings right now doing his job despite the pain. At 8:00 p.m., the doors opened and the audience poured in, 800 people representing every segment of Vegas society. High rollers from the casino floor who'd been betting thousands downstairs. Tourists who'd saved for months for these $50 tickets, a major expense in 1972. Locals who'd seen Dean dozens of times and never tired of it. Business executives entertaining clients. Hollywood types, including a famous actress in the front row. Casino regulars who came weekly. Everyone who was anyone in Vegas came to Dean Martin shows. The energy built as the room filled, orders flooding in for steaks and shrimp cocktails and top-shelf liquor, the orchestra tuning to the room's acoustics, the lighting crew, including Tommy, making final adjustments, everything perfect, professional, ready for the magic that was about to happen. At 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes before curtain, Dean stood in his dressing room in full tuxedo now, bow tie perfect, hair immaculate, looking exactly like Dean Martin should look, but he hadn't moved toward the stage entrance. Mort noticed anxiety creeping into his voice. "Dean, 15 minutes. Orchestra's ready." Dean nodded but didn't stand, his mind still calculating, working through the impossible mathematics of the choice in front of him. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Michael might be asleep by 10 p.m., the morphine schedule dictating his waking hours. The show ran 90 minutes, meaning an 11 p.m. finish, plus a 30-minute hospital drive would put him there at 11:30 p.m. Too late for a dying kid who needed sleep, who was barely hanging on. If he was going to visit Michael, it had to be now, which meant choosing one thing over another, one audience over another, one obligation over another. At 9:00 p.m., 5 minutes before curtain, the showroom was electric, 800 people, with drinks flowing and anticipation at maximum. The orchestra ready with instruments raised. Lights dimmed with the spotlight aimed perfectly at the stage entrance, the moment everyone had paid for approaching with inevitable momentum. Dean stood, and Mort exhaled with relief, thinking the crisis had passed. But Dean didn't walk toward the stage entrance. He walked toward the phone in his dressing room, and Mort watched, confused and increasingly worried. Dean dialed, waited for the connection. Sunrise Hospital. How may I direct your call? Dean's voice was calm, decided. Room 412, please. Pediatric ICU. A brief pause as the call transferred, Mort watching in disbelief. A nurse answered. Fourth floor pediatric ICU. This is Nurse Patricia. This is Dean Martin. I'm calling about Michael Chen. How is he tonight? Silence on the other end. Shock and disbelief fighting with professional composure. Mr. Martin. Is this really Mike? Michael is stable but very weak. He's been asking about you all day. His father mentioned your show tonight. Michael wanted so badly to be there. He cried earlier because he couldn't go. Dean looked at his watch, 9:02 p.m., and the decision crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. Tell Michael I'm coming to see him right now. Tell him to stay awake. Can you do that? The nurse's voice reflected her shock. You're coming here. Now. But your show. Dean cut her off, gently but firmly. Tell him to get ready for a show. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up, turned to Mort, who'd been listening with growing horror at what this meant. Call the showroom. Cancel tonight's performance. Mort's voice came out strangled. What? You heard me. Cancel it. Refund everyone's money. Dean, there are 800 people out there. The Sands is counting on you. You can't just walk away from a sold-out show. Your contract. Dean's voice remained calm but carried absolute finality. I can. And I am. Refund everyone. Comp their rooms if you need to. Do whatever it takes. But I'm not performing here tonight. Mort, desperate, tried one more time. Where are you going that's more important than 800 paying customers? Dean headed for the door, already moving with purpose. To do a show for someone who needs it more. At 9:05 p.m. the showroom, Frank Ortega, the orchestra conductor, stood waiting for Don's entrance cue, his baton raised. The spotlight on the empty stage entrance, the audience murmuring and checking watches, the anticipation turning slowly into confusion. Instead of Dean Martin, Mort Venner walked onto the stage, and the audience immediately knew something was wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, Mort's voice shook despite his attempts at professional composure. I'm very sorry to inform you that tonight's performance has been canceled due to an emergency. Everyone will receive a full refund plus complimentary accommodations. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. The audience reaction was immediate, and visceral confusion rippling through 800 people like a wave, then transforming into anger. What emergency? Someone shouted. This is unprofessional. Another voice called out. I flew here from Chicago. A woman yelled, her vacation ruined. Some demanded to speak to managers. Others threatened lawsuits. A few understood that emergencies happen, but most were furious. Their Saturday night destroyed, their expensive tickets wasted, their plans ruined. Casino executives panicked, calculating the huge revenue loss, the damage to reputation, the nightmare of 800 angry customers. Tommy, standing in the wings doing his job despite everything, heard the announcement and realized immediately what it meant, his heart sinking with the knowledge that Dean was going to Michael, that Dean had chosen his son over all of this. Meanwhile, Dan was already in the parking lot, getting into his Cadillac, still wearing his full tuxedo, driving north on Las Vegas Boulevard toward Sunrise Hospital, about to give the most important performance of his life to an audience that would never review him, never pay him, never applaud in a way that mattered to his career, but would remember him forever. At 9:25 p.m., Dean's Cadillac pulled into Sunrise Hospital's emergency parking lot, and he got out in full tuxedo, bow tie, and pocket square. Completely out of place in a hospital parking lot where tuxedos belonged at celebrations, not where people were dying. From the back seat, Dean retrieved a portable record player with built-in speaker, a stack of vinyl records including his own albums, a small portable microphone setup he used for private rehearsals, and a prop glass for his famous drunk persona. People entering and leaving the hospital stopped and stared, trying to process why a man in formal wear was at a hospital at 9:30 on a Saturday night. The automatic door slid open, and Dean stepped into the lobby, fluorescent lights harsh after the warm stage lighting he was accustomed to, the hospital smell hitting him immediately. Antiseptic and floor cleaner with undertones of illness and fear, the unmistakable atmosphere of a place where bad news lived. At the reception desk, a young woman named Susan looked up, did a double take, then a triple take, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. "Mr. Martin." Dean's voice was matter-of-fact. "I'm here to see Michael Chen. Room 412, pediatric ICU. They're expecting me." Susan stared, speechless, because this didn't happen. Celebrities didn't show up at hospitals in tuxedos at 9:30 p.m. on Saturday nights. "You're really here." "Actually here, Pa. I'm really here." "Which way?" She pointed, still processing the impossibility. "Fourth floor. Elevators to your left." Dean walked through the lobby carrying his equipment, and people stopped mid-conversation, jaws dropping, whispers starting to spread. "Is that Dean Martin? What's he doing here? Why is he in a tuxedo?" Dean didn't acknowledge anyone, focused entirely on his destination, moving with the same purposeful energy he brought to every performance. The elevator doors opened on the fourth floor and everything changed. This floor quieter. Dimmer lighting because children were sleeping. The sounds different here, monitors beeping and ventilators humming, and the occasional child crying. The smell stronger. More antiseptic mixed with medicine and something sweet like child-friendly air freshener. The atmosphere heavier because this was where children fought for life. The nurses' station was directly ahead. 3 nurses at the end of their shift, exhausted from the weight of caring for dying children. They looked up simultaneously, and Nurse Patricia stood, the one Dean had called. She was mid-40s with kind eyes and 16 hours of shift visible in her posture. "Actually came. You said I would," said I, told Michael. He didn't believe me at first. Thought I was trying to make him feel better, giving false hope. Then he heard about your show on the radio this afternoon, the announcer promoting tonight's sold-out performance. And Michael said, "See, he's performing at the Sands. He's not coming here." Nobody cancels a show to visit a hospital. Dean's jaw tightened, feeling the weight of that. The kid thinking Dean had more important things to do, never imagining that he'd be chosen over 800 other people. "Is he awake?" "Very awake. He's been asking for you every 5 minutes for the last half hour. Every time I check on him, he asks, 'Is he here yet?' Did he really say he's coming?" Patricia led Dean down the corridor, rooms on either side, most doors closed, a few open with glimpses of sick children and worried parents beside beds. They registered Dean's presence, Dean Martin in a tuxedo walking past, but nobody said anything because this floor had bigger concerns than celebrity sightings. Room 4012 had its door slightly ajar. Soft light from inside, the sound of monitors beeping rhythmically, the mechanical proof that life was still happening. Patricia knocked gently. "Michael, you have a very special visitor." She pushed the door open fully. Inside room 412, Michael Chen lay in his hospital bed, elevated 30 degrees to help him breathe easier. Oxygen tubes ran into his nose, clear plastic tape to his cheeks, IV lines in both arms, one in his hand and one in his elbow, crook monitors tracking his heartbeat at 52 beats per minute, slower than normal, oxygen saturation at 88%, lower than it should be, blood pressure flickering on the screen. Michael's appearance was devastating, pale skin almost translucent, eyes sunken into his face. His body thin with the particular thinness that cancer creates, not normal thin, but wasted thin. His hair was mostly gone from chemotherapy, just patches remaining. He wore a hospital gown too big for his shrunken frame, making him look even smaller. He looked 9 years old, not 12, the disease having stolen years from his appearance. The room told its own story. A Dean Martin poster taped to the wall beside the bed showing Dean in his prime, smiling with a microphone in the 1960s. A card collection on the windowsill with "Get well soon" messages from classmates Michael hadn't seen in months, a vinyl record propped up showing "Everybody Loves Somebody," Dean's biggest hit, a teddy bear on the chair from when Michael was younger but still there for comfort. The window was closed, night outside, Las Vegas lights distant and irrelevant. The smell in the room mixed antiseptic and medicine with something sweet, the distinctive smell of morphine that experienced hospital staff recognized immediately. Tommy sat in a chair beside the bed, hadn't left in 48 hours, unshaven and exhausted, holding Michael's hand. He stood when Dean entered, shock crossing his face and transforming into overwhelming emotion. "Dean."
"What are you?"
"The show. You're supposed to be." Michael's reaction stopped everything. His eyes went wide, trying to sit up, his body too weak to manage it. The monitors starting to beep faster as his heart rate increased with excitement. His voice came out raspy, damaged from the ventilator that had only been removed that morning. Dad, it's really him. Dean Martin. He's here, in my room." He started crying, not sad crying, but overwhelmed crying, the impossible thing he'd wanted most actually happening in front of him. If you value real stories about what people do when no one's watching, like and subscribe. Dean approached the bed, setting down his equipment carefully, pulling up a chair to sit at Michael's eye level on the opposite side from Tommy. "He there, Michael. Your dad tells me you wanted to see a show?" Michael, through tears and struggling to breathe and talk simultaneously, managed to get the words out. "You're supposed to be at the Sands, I heard. On the radio. Sold out. You canceled. Because of me?" Dean's voice took on the easy, casual tone he used on stage, the tone that made everything seem effortless. "Nah, I didn't cancel. I moved it. Different venue, more exclusive. You ever been to a private show before?" Michael shook his head, unable to speak, his hands trembling with emotion and physical weakness. Dean looked at Tommy, whose face was completely breaking down with gratitude. "You mind if I borrow your son for about half an hour?" Tommy's voice came out broken. "Dean, you didn't have to do this. You don't have to. I don't have to. I want to." Dean turned back to Michael, his full attention on the boy. "But first, I need to know something important. What's your favorite Dean Martin song?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, his damaged throat struggling with each word. "Everybody Loves Somebody." Dean smiled warmly. "Good choice. That's a great one. What else? Give me your top 3. Michael, getting excited despite the pain it caused, managed to continue. "That's a more. And Ain't That a Kick in the Head? And the one where you sound drunk. That one's fun." Laughed, genuine and delighted. "You like when I pretend to be drunk." "Smart kid, that's my best bit." Dean stood and started arranging his portable equipment, finding an outlet near the bed, positioning his prop glass on the bedside table, loosening his bow tie slightly, unbuttoning his tuxedo jacket, making himself comfortable in the small hospital room. "Here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to give you the full Dan Martin experience, the songs, the jokes, the drunk routine, everything. But I gotta warn you." He leaned in conspiratorially, dropped into a stage whisper. I sometimes forget the words. Happens all the time. If I mess up, you gotta help me out." "Deal." Michael nodded, already laughing, actually laughing. A sound Tommy hadn't heard in 3 weeks, a sound that made the heart monitor beep faster, registering something that might actually be joy. Dean started with physical comedy, pretending to trip over the IV stand, doing an exaggerated stumble that made Michael giggle, which turned into coughing, but Michael waved Tommy off when his father moved to help, not wanting anything to stop this moment. Dean did a double take at the medical equipment like it was the most confusing thing he'd ever seen, picking up the oxygen tube and examining it with mock seriousness. "Is this how you tune into the radio here?" Michael laughed harder now, despite the pain it caused, the joy overwhelming the discomfort. Dean pretended to drink from his prop glass. doing his famous drunk wobble, bumping gently into the hospital bed and acting shocked that it had moved. These hotel rooms are getting smaller every year. Michael was belly laughing now, the monitors going crazy, a nurse peeking in with worry that transformed into amazement as she saw what was happening. Dean continued with his standard jokes, modified appropriately for a 12-year-old. Nothing inappropriate, but all the physical comedy, the confused drunk character, the self-deprecating humor, and every joke landed perfectly because Michael knew these bits, had heard them on records 100 times, the joy of seeing them live and perform just for him, making each one funnier than it had any right to be. Then Dean set up the vinyl record backing track, took his portable microphone, and stood beside Michael's bed to begin the music portion. "All right, you ready for the first one?" Michael nodded eagerly, his face transformed by anticipation. Dean started singing, "Everybody Loves Somebody," not the full production, not the orchestra arrangement, just Dean's voice and the backing track and a dying kid, but Dean performed it like it was Carnegie Hall. Full commitment, perfect pitch, every note delivered with care, looking at Michael while singing, making it personal and intimate. Michael mouthed the words along with him, knowing every lyric. Tears streaming down his face, Tommy crying in the corner trying to stay quiet, Nurse Patricia standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. Dean finished and Michael couldn't applaud because he was too weak, but his face said everything that needed saying. "All right, you ready for the Italian one?" Dean asked, and Michael nodded with everything he had. Dean started, "That's amore," doing the hand gestures and Italian expressions, getting Michael to try the hand gestures even though he could barely lift his arms, Dean exaggerating his own movements to compensate for what Michael couldn't do. Mid-song, Dean deliberately forgot a word. "When the world seems to shine like you've had too much." Michael, what's the word?" Michael, delighted to be part of the performance, managed to say, "What wine," with as much energy as he could muster. "That's right. See, I told you I'd need help." They finished together, Michael mouthing the words, Dean singing with full energy. For the third song, Dean launched into "Ain't That a Kick in the Head," upbeat and jazzy, doing the full performance with finger snaps and shoulder shimmies and swagger, moving around the small room carefully to avoid disturbing medical equipment, treating the hospital room like it was the biggest stage in Vegas. Michael watched, transfixed, living a dream he'd thought impossible, his eyes following Dean's every movement, his face showing pure wonder. After the third song, Dean sat back down, breathing slightly harder from the performance, and Michael, exhausted but radiantly happy, whispered words that would stay with Dean forever. "Thank you. This is the best night of my life." Dean took Michael's hand, so small and thin and cold in his own. "Michael, I want you to know something. I've performed for presidents, for thousands of people, in the best venues in the world. But this," he gestured around the hospital room with its monitors and IV stands and medical equipment, "this might be my favorite show ever. You know why?" Michael shook his head, unable to imagine why. "Because you're the best audience I've ever had. You knew every word. You laughed at all my jokes. And you helped me when I forgot the lyrics." He paused, making sure Michael understood every word. "You're a special kid, Michael Chen, and I'm honored I got to perform for you." Michael started crying again, happy tears mixing with overwhelmed tears, his emotions too big for his small, weakened body. "I'm going to remember this forever," Michael said with absolute certainty. Dean squeezed his hand gently, carefully, aware of how fragile everything about this boy was. "Men too, kid. Me too." At 10:15 p.m., Dean stood and started packing his equipment, and Michael's voice filled with panic. "You're leaving. I gotta let you get some rest. Doctor's orders." "But hey," Dean pulled out the vinyl record of "Everybody Loves Somebody" from his collection, the one he'd brought specifically for this moment. "This is for you. And I'm gonna sign it right now." He took out a pen and wrote on the album cover in his distinctive handwriting, "To Michael Chen, the best audience I ever had. Keep fighting, kid. Your friend, Dan Martin." He handed it to Michael, who clutched it like the treasure it was, like the most valuable thing he'd ever owned. Dan looked at Tommy, who was standing now completely broken by gratitude and emotion, and put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. No words necessary, just a squeeze that said everything. "I see you. I see your pain. I see your son." Dean walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "Michael." The boy looked at him with exhausted, happy eyes. "You keep listening to music, okay? Even when it's hard, music makes everything a little better." Michael nodded, already fading into morphine sleep, clutching his signed album. Dean left room 412, walked down the corridor past rooms with other sick children and worried parents, reached the elevator and pressed the button. Nurse Patricia caught him just as the doors opened. "Mr. Martin, what you just did." Dean cut her off gently but firmly. "I didn't do anything. I just moved a show to a different venue. That's all." He got in the elevator and the doors closed, leaving him alone for the first time since he'd made his decision. He allowed himself one moment where the professional mask dropped completely, leaning against the elevator wall, closing his eyes, thinking about 800 angry people at the Sands, thinking about one happy kid in room 412, and knowing with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Tuesday morning arrived 3 days later, and Dean was at his breakfast table in Beverly Hills at 7:30 a.m. with coffee and newspaper when the phone rang. His housekeeper answered, then brought the phone to him with a somber expression. "Mr. Martin, it's a Mr. Chen da." Dean's stomach dropped because he already knew what this call meant. He took the phone, his hand steady despite everything. "Tommy." Tommy's voice was barely holding together, each word an effort. "Dean." "Michael, he passed this morning." Around 6 a.m., peacefully, in his sleep. Silence on the line, Dean's hand gripping the phone tighter, his other hand flat on the table, steadying himself. "Tommy, I'm so sorry." "Dean, I need to tell you something." Tommy's voice steadied slightly, like he'd been rehearsing these words, like he needed Dean to hear them. "The last 3 days of Michael's life were the happiest I'd seen him in 18 months. He talked about Saturday night constantly. He played that album you signed over and over. He told every nurse, every doctor, every visitor about your show. Dan Martin performed just for me," he'd say with such pride. "In my room." Tommy's voice broke again, the grief overwhelming the preparation. "You gave him something I couldn't give him with all my love. You gave him joy. At the very end, when there was only pain left, you gave him joy." Dean couldn't speak, couldn't find words adequate to the moment. Thank you doesn't come close to enough, but thank you. Thursday afternoon, at a small Catholic church in East Las Vegas, Michael's funeral took place. It wasn't a celebrity funeral, just a family funeral with maybe 50 people. Family and friends and Michael's classmates and teachers and neighbors, people who'd known and loved the boy. A closed casket sat at the front with flowers surrounding it, Michael's school photo beside it showing him smiling and healthy and alive, the boy he'd been before cancer. Dan Martin arrived quietly, not in a limousine but in his own car, not in a flashy suit but in a simple dark suit. No photographers and no press because he'd specifically told his publicist no coverage. This wasn't about him. He sat in the back row and people recognized him, murmurs rippling through the church, but nobody approached because the context demanded respect. Tommy saw Dean from the front row, nodded acknowledgement, his eyes communicating gratitude beyond words. The priest spoke about Michael's brief life, his love of music, his favorite singer Dan Martin, and mentioned that Michael's final wish had come true. In his last days, Michael received a visit from his hero, someone who took time from a busy schedule to bring joy to a dying child. Michael spoke of nothing else until he passed. It was the greatest gift anyone could have given him. Dean, in the back row, fought tears, the public nature of the setting making emotional display difficult. After the service, outside the church with people milling about in that uncomfortable way people do after funerals, Dean approached Tommy, who stood with his wife Linda and extended family. Tommy saw Dean, excused himself, walked over to meet him. "Dean, you came?" "Of course I came. You didn't have to. You already—" Dean shook his head, cutting off the protest. "Tommy, I want to take care of the expenses. The funeral, the hospital bills, all of it. Please don't argue with me on this." Tommy started to protest because it felt like too much because he had his pride. "Dean, you've already done so much." "Tommy." Dean's voice was firm but kind. "Let me do this. For Michael. Please." Tommy, overwhelmed by everything, the grief and gratitude and generosity, nodded his acceptance. They stood in silence for a moment, two men bound by shared experience and loss. Then Tommy said something Dean would never forget. "You lost money that night. Canceled the biggest show of the season. Probably made the casino angry, maybe hurt your reputation, but you gave my son his dying wish. You chose one child over 800 paying customers. That's who you are, Dan Martin." Dean didn't know what to say to that, couldn't find words that felt adequate, so he just put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. The same gesture from the hospital, the same silent acknowledgement. In the following week, rumors circulated through Vegas about why Dean had canceled that show, and the press asked Dean's publicist for comment. Per Dean's instructions, the publicist said only, "Miss Eyre, Martin had a personal emergency." No further comment. Dean refused to elaborate, refused to tell the story, refused to get credit for what he'd done, because that wasn't why he'd done it. Some stories, leaked anyway, mentions in trade papers that Dean Martin had visited a sick child, that he'd canceled a show for a private concert, but Den never confirmed details, never gave interviews about it, never used it for publicity. The full story only came out 20 years later in 1992 when Tommy, retiring from the Sands, was interviewed by the Las Vegas Review-Journal for a feature called "The Men Behind the Lights," about longtime Vegas stagehands. Tommy Chen, now 65 and retiring after 32 years at the Sands, was asked by the reporter what his most memorable moment working in Vegas had been. Tommy paused for a long time, then told the entire story about Michael and the leukemia and Dean canceling the show and the hospital performance and Michael dying 3 days later. The reporter was stunned. Dean Martin never talked about this publicly. Tommy nodded. "No, he didn't. That's who Dean was. He didn't do good things for publicity. He did them because they were right. That night cost him money. Probably cost him respect among casino executives. Maybe damage his reputation for reliability. But he chose my son over all of it. 800 people were angry they didn't see a show. One child died having seen the best show of his life." The story ran in the Sunday edition and got picked up by Associated Press, spreading to national coverage. People called Dean's representatives for comment, but Dunn, now 75 and semi-retired, said only, "Tommy Chen is a good man. Michael was a special kid. That's all I have to say." He refused to elaborate further, but the story spread anyway. People who'd been at that canceled show in 1972, some angry for 20 years that their vacation had been ruined, now reading why he'd canceled, many wrote letters saying, "If I'd known, I wouldn't have been angry. I wish someone had told us. I would have gladly given up my seat for that child." Dean received Tommy's article in the mail at his home with a note attached from Tommy that read, "Dean, I hope you don't mind that I told the story. People should know what kind of man you are. Michael would have wanted people to know. Thank you again for giving him his final joy. Tommy." Dean sat with the article for a long time, remembering room 412, remembering Michael's face lighting up, remembering the choice he'd made 801, and knowing he'd make the same choice again, every single time. What that night really meant wasn't about generosity, because Dean Martin was famous for being generous, tips of hundreds of dollars to waiters, paying off strangers' debts, funding friends' medical bills. But that night wasn't about money. That night was about something harder, about sacrifice. The real cost to Dean was over $50,000 in revenue from his percentage of the sold-out show, casino goodwill because they depended on him being reliable, his reputation for professionalism because you don't cancel on 800 people, industry perception because word spreads and people remember when you're unreliable, 800 angry customers, some of whom would never forgive him, potential lawsuits for breach of contract. What Dean couldn't buy back was the trust of casino executives, the certainty that he'd always be welcome at the Sands, the understanding that his contract meant something, his track record of never missing a show. But what Michael received wasn't money, it was time. Dean's actual physical presence, 30 minutes of undivided attention from his hero, a private concert worth more than any ticket price, the knowledge that someone had chosen him, that he mattered more than 800 other people, that he was worth canceling a show for, that he was worth sacrificing for. If Dean had performed at the Sands that night, 800 people would have been happy. The casino would have been happy. His career would have remained intact. Money would have been earned, his reputation maintained. But Michael would have died never having met his hero. And Tommy would have understood because that's just how life works, and it would have been the logical choice, the safe choice, the professional choice. But Dean went to the hospital instead, making 800 people furious, making the casino furious, risking his career, losing money, damaging his reputation, but allowing Michael to die having lived his dream and Tommy to experience humanity at its best. And it was the illogical choice, the risky choice, the human choice, and Dean chose human. The question this story asks is, what do you do when the right thing costs you something? Not when it's easy or convenient, or when cameras are watching, but when it's hard, when it costs money and reputation and career, when no one will know, when you'll be criticized, when you might regret it. The measure of a man isn't what he does when it benefits him. It's what he does when it costs him. When the easy choice is professional and the hard choice is human, and you choose human anyway because some things matter more than success, more than money, more than reputation. Because a dying child matters more than 800 disappointed adults, and that's not heroism, that's just being human, that's just choosing correctly. On Christmas Day 1995, Dean Martin died at 78, and among those at his funeral was Tommy Chen, now 68, still working at the Sands because he couldn't bear to leave the place where he'd known Dean. When asked to speak, Tommy stood and told the Room 412 story one more time. People will remember Dean Martin the entertainer, the singer, the actor, the Rat Pack, but I'll remember Dean Martin the man who chose my dying son over 800 paying customers, the man who gave Michael his final joy, the man who never told anyone what he'd sacrificed because he didn't do it for credit. He did it because it was right, and that's who Dean Martin was when the cameras were off. That's the man I'll remember forever. The vinyl record Dean had signed for Michael. To Michael Chen, the best audience I ever had. Keep fighting, kid. Your friend, Dean Martin. Tommy kept for 23 years, never playing it after Michael died because it was too painful, but never throwing it away either. When Tommy died in 2003, his will specified that the album should go to the Smithsonian Museum of American History, where a plaque now reads, "This album was signed by Dean Martin for Michael Chen, age 12, during a private performance in Michael's hospital room on September 14, 1972. Dean Martin canceled a sold-out show of 800 people to perform for Michael in his final days. Michael died 3 days later. This album represents what Dean Martin valued most, not the applause of thousands, but the joy of one child. The album is there today on display, a reminder that some performances aren't measured by ticket sales. If this story of choosing humanity over career moved you, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We share real Hollywood stories about what people did when no one was watching. Your support helps us preserve these moments of genuine character. September 14, 1972, the Sands Hotel Showroom, Las Vegas, the night Dean Martin walked away from 800 paying customers to perform for an audience of one, a 12-year-old boy dying of cancer. That night cost Dean Martin everything a performer values: money and reputation and professional reliability, the trust of the casino, and the satisfaction of 800 customers. His track record of never missing a show, but it bought something you can't price: a dying child's joy, a father's gratitude, a moment of pure humanity, the knowledge that when it mattered most, he chose correctly. 800 people went home disappointed that night. Most never knew why. Some stayed angry for 20 years, but one child went to sleep happy, lived 3 more days, died having met his hero, died knowing someone thought he was worth more than a sold-out show. Dean chose the one over the 800, not because it was smart, not because it was profitable, not because anyone would know, but because it was right. No cameras recorded that hospital performance. No reviews were written, no tickets were sold, no applause from thousands echoed through a showroom. Just a dying child and a portable record player and 30 minutes and a man in a tuxedo who understood that some audiences matter more than others. Dean Martin performed for presidents, for sold-out crowds in the best venues in the world, for millions on television, but ask Tommy Chen what performance mattered most, and he'd say Room 412, Sunrise Hospital, an audience of one. The night Dean Martin proved that real character isn't what you do when everyone's watching, it's what you sacrifice when no one will ever know. Michael's album sits in the Smithsonian today, a reminder not of Dean Martin the entertainer, but of Dean Martin the man who chose one child over 800 adults, who chose humanity over career, who chose right over easy. And the question isn't whether Dean made the right choice. The question is, would you? That's a story worth remembering.